First, here's an important story from the world over, one we've been following for you for years now. The body of Bishop Fulton J. Sheen should be moved to a new shrine in Peoria, Illinois. That's the unanimous ruling of a New York appeals court. On Tuesday, the court instructed the trustees of St. Patrick's Cathedral to permit the removal of Sheen's body. In June, diocesan officials in New York announced their decision to appeal a previous ruling by the Superior Court of New York in favor of Joan Sheen Cunningham. That's Archbishop Sheen's niece. She had petitioned the court to move her uncle's body to Peoria as a necessary part of his cause for canonization. The tug-of-war over Sheen's body dates back to 2002, when the Diocese of Peoria announced it would pursue his cause for canonization after the Archdiocese of New York declined to do so. This is the third time that the New York court system has ruled in Joan Sheen Cunningham's favor. The Archdiocese of New York says it disagrees with the most recent ruling and is considering yet another appeal. My first guest just wrapped up his first season as a linebacker for the NFC Southern Division champs, the New Orleans Saints. At 6'2", 250 pounds, he's a fearsome presence on the gridiron, but there is much more to his story than what you see on the field. I spoke to him recently at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference here in Washington. We talked about his career, his faith, and his most recent work on behalf of criminal justice reform. Here's my interview with Demario Davis. Now, I have a confession to make before we start. Here at CPAC, you know, they don't like you to wear T-shirts, but if I were going to wear a T-shirt, this is the one I was going to wear. I am a proud member of the Houdat Nation, so to have Demario here, just so you know, Demario Davis, this last season, and I was in the Superdome for a lot of these games, he had the #1 tackling record in the NFL. More sacks, more than 100 tackles, an incredible player. But he's so much more than that. And today we want to talk about really one of the passions of your life, Demario, which is criminal justice reform. Tell people a little bit about your story. When you were in 10th grade, something happened. What happened?
Well, it was where I lived at. My mom had me when she was 16 years old, and so the environment that I grew up in was filled with drugs, gangs, clubs, and I got involved in a lot of that. And by the time I got to college, and though I had a scholarship, my first year in college, I was arrested and went to jail for shoplifting and stealing groceries out of Walmart. And when I went to jail, I realized that I had a $10,000 bond, and I didn't have $10,000 to pay, so I didn't know what was going to happen, but my coach paid my way, and I was able to get out of jail and not spend that time, you know, pre-trial leading up to my court date in jail. And then when I got to the league and started to spend time in the criminal justice reform space and realized that people are going to jail simply because they can't pay the bill, and they're spending 7, 8 months in jail, sometimes years in jail without even having a court date because the system is so backed up. I realized that I easily could have been a statistic had my coaches not stepped in and paid that. I couldn't pay the bill. My mom couldn't pay it. We didn't have that type of money, but because I was an athlete, I was able to not go to jail.
Give people a sense, you know, we all think, well, this doesn't affect me. Pretrial incarceration, that couldn't affect me at all. I was stunned when I started doing research on this. You have rapists, you have child molesters, you have murderers who are set free in the pretrial period, but people who shoplift, engage in nonviolent crimes, they are often incarcerated, sometimes for a month, awaiting trial or more. What's the cost to us as a people, financially and otherwise?
Well, you got to realize it's going to fix the taxpayers tremendously. I give you a story about a grandmother in San Antonio who stole $105 worth of clothes to put clothes on the back of her grandkids, was arrested and spent 3 months in jail because she had a $150,000 bond that she could not pay. You think about how that's going to affect those children tremendously. So for that crime, because she couldn't pay it, she spent 3 months in jail. But you just talked about the serious crimes, far more serious than that, who people are able to get out of jail immediately because they have the funds to get out. But that grandmother spending that time cost the taxpayers on average $3,000, additional $3,000. For pretrial last year, we paid $13.6 billion in taxes for the pretrial, because there are 40% of our nation that's locked up. The most incarcerated country in the world is pretrial, and 9 out of 10 of those people who are in jail pretrial are because of cash bail.
I was stunned when I learned just this week, because I do a lot of work, as Demario does, with illiteracy, with children. Do you know it costs in California almost $130,000 per inmate per year to incarcerate them? For juveniles, it jumps up to more than $180,000. That comes out of our tax dollars annually, and that's just one person.
One person.
What is the answer here? I know the American Conservative Union has been supporting something like these freedom, bail organizations that would be community-based, so that, let's back up a moment. Tell people about the financial incentives that are at play in the system today to actually jail people, and the bail lobbyists. Tell us about that and the effect it has.
Well, yeah, to speak a little bit to both of what you said, number one, you got to think about the school-to-prison pipeline. So they're going into the schools and looking at the 4th grade reading level and deciding just how many prisons we want to build based on this the reading level of 4th graders. So at the same time, they could actually, for me to send my child to a private school, one of the best private schools, is going to be about $20,000 a year. Right. So you're thinking about $180,000 to hold somebody in prison versus $20,000 to just build a school that was big enough to facilitate these children and enhance the reading level, which you would think would be the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Sounds too much, it makes too much sense.
Right.
But when you talk about the bail system, when we go and fight these legislative bills in California and New York, speaking of that, there's a bill trying to get passed right now that the legislators are trying to figure out they want to do criminal justice reform around cash bail. Yeah. The people who are fighting against this are the bail bondsmen and the prosecutors, the people who benefit from sending people to jail. We have a user-friendly system in New Orleans where the judge, the prosecutor, and the defender are all incentivized to send people to jail. They all get paid based on how many people are in jail. How is that going to affect the person that's standing before the judge? Yeah. Nobody here has a reason not to send this person to jail. Actually, they make more money by this person going to jail. So that makes the defender less likely to defend them, the judge less likely to declare innocent, and the prosecutor to ask for the harshest punishment.
And the taxpayer's left with the bill.
Exactly.
In perpetuity. I mean, the other problem here is the human capital lost. I mean, we have the innovation, the intensity, the creativity of individuals who aren't given a second chance. And again, we're talking about nonviolent offenders here. What are you hearing? There seems to be a movement. We saw President Trump move a criminal justice reform bill this past year, something that has not been done. Administration after administration promised it. Congress after Congress promised it. This first step, which is what it's called, moved forward this past year. Your thoughts on what that means? There seems to be a consensus on right and left that we have to do something about criminal justice.
I think the momentum is starting to move in the right direction. I think there are great ideas to be able to replicate. You look at D.C., it does have a no cash bail system. The crime is definitely not higher here than anywhere else. I mean, you think the justice system is designed to make our community safer. You look at Philadelphia. An op-ed was printed today in the USA Today talking about Larry Krasner and what he's doing as a prosecutor in Philadelphia. 25 cases where he chose to do no cash bail. And that's about 61% of the cases that came to Philadelphia. And these were nonviolent offenses, including drug offenses and prostitution. And actually, the violent crimes decreased by 5% in 2018. And the crime rate did not go up.
There was another study, and this is fascinating, that I came across just in my own research. What happens to a nonviolent offender when you hold them pre-trial, okay? When you incarcerate them for a day, 2 days, 3 days. Here's what they found. 2 to 3 days incarceration, they're 39% more likely to be charged with another crime. You keep them from 4 to 7 days, again, in a pre-trial incarceration, they're 50% more likely to be arrested a second time. What does that tell you, and what can be done about this?
That's a tremendous tragedy, and I would even up that even more.
Really?
The death rate goes up in jail, and is more likely for our pretrial people. A third of the people that die in jail die within the first week. Also, 3/4 of the deaths that happen in our country in jail are pretrial inmates. So it's almost like a death sentence to send somebody to jail for that extent of period of time without them being convicted of being innocent or guilty.
And we're literally talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars in pretrial incarceration. We're not talking about not penalizing people who are guilty of heinous crimes. That's not what we're talking about here. But that pretrial period, if you're dealing with a non-violent offender, is it worth it? In Cuyahoga County in Ohio, just Cuyahoga, $42 million they spent last year. We've spent $13 billion nationally incarcerating people pre-trial. What do you suggest? What should be the legislative step? What are you asking people to do to reform this bail and pre-trial incarceration area?
I think it looks different a little bit everywhere, but ultimately we should be trying to move away from cash bail as a whole. If we feel like somebody's going to be a threat to society, don't recommend bail. So for those people who are, we do have very violent offenders and people who are very scary who need to be locked up. Just simply ask that they don't have bail. But for our non-violent offenders, you're pretty much making it a profit-based system. You know, it's all about, do you have the money or do you not have the money? That depends on if you're going to stay in jail or not. Also, the bail system is designed to incentivize people to come back. What we've found out statistically is people who get out of jail on cash bail are 94% with no cash bail, or 94% likely to return to court.
The other thing I think a lot of people miss because either they don't see it in their own family or they haven't heard the stories. When you take someone and incarcerate them, particularly if it's a head of a household, the sole grandmother who's raising children, what impact does that have on the family? I mean, you yourself, your father was a vet. He was away serving in the Middle East. And do you think that caused you to turn to mentors who were perhaps not the best mentors at the time? And do you see a pattern of that?
Oh, all the time. If you look in the communities where we raised, a lot of the men are not in the household for various reasons. So the young boys, I believe very much so that it takes a man to teach a boy how to be a man. And when they're not around, the boys are just going to look to the older guys in society, and the older guys in our society were drug dealers, gangbangers, and whatnot. And so that's kind of who we followed and tried to emulate, and that's what took us down a bad path. So we have to think about that we're actually making our communities less safer when we take people and lock them up for that extent of time for non-violent offenses, because they're going to be gone from their family. It's going to drastically push them into even more poverty, because if my mom, had I not had a coach, my mom would have tried everything she could to get me out of jail on bail, which would have forced her to go to a bail bondsman who would have made her put her house up, maybe put her car up, and just kind of locked her into some type of slave type system, something that she couldn't pay back. And when she couldn't pay back, she was indebted to the bail bondsman, which would have pushed her into even more poverty.
Yeah. We've got to do something about this bail system. It's not, but again, the bail bond lobbyists are, every time the reform moves forward, they sort of seize in. But it's not good for us as a people. It's not good for the community. It's certainly not good for children. I want to talk for a moment about your Devoted Dreamers Foundation. Tell people a little bit about, in your personal life, when you come out of prison, you're at the, well, you weren't there for long, but you were caught up in the system, you come out, you're at Arkansas State, you meet a pastor there who really changed your life.
Yes, very much so.
Tell me what happened there.
So I had the opportunity to be discipled by our team chaplain, and a little bit after, when I was in jail for the 3 days that I was in there, I just started to really wrestle and understand my life isn't going the direction I wanted to go. And he just started spending time with me day by day, asking questions about what I thought about life. And he introduced me to the Bible and started to teach me about a relationship with Christ. He walked me into a relationship with Christ, and it changed my life and the perspective that I had of life tremendously. You know, no longer was my life about glorifying myself, but it was about living a life worthy of glorifying the King. And I watched him, and I watched how it was amazing. My whole life I had never seen a two-parent household and be led under God, and so I watched him and how he raised his family, and it inspired me to do the same. I've been married now 7 years, 3 amazing kids, and they all raised in the household of Christ. And Yeah, it changed tremendously. And so had I never got that second chance, my life could look totally different. But because I had that second chance, and that's the importance that we make sure we're doing with the rest of society, instead of throwing people away and locking away the key, we need to be making sure we're trying our best to give them second chances, because you never know what kind of positivity can come out of that.
And connection. I love in your story, connections, mentorship. We can't give up on anybody. And one of the beautiful things, I live in New Orleans, and if you have not seen this guy play, I was in the Superdome this last season. You all are going to the Super Bowl next year. I'm just saying it now. You heard it here first at CPAC, okay? At the end of every major play, Demario does something that you all perhaps have not seen. But watch closely next season, because I think you're going to see a lot of it. I mean, this guy led in tackles last season. He'll do it again. Show people what you do at the end of a major play. There's a gesture you do. Show it to. I know it's a little awkward here.
A lot of times, if you haven't seen it, what I'll do is, after a sack or a big play or an interception, what I'll usually do is just go and where I find a camera, you'll see me do that. And it's a very simple pose, but a lot of believers.
Tell people what it means.
A lot of people have seen that, and a lot of believers would know what that means, but because they've seen that pose so much. But it's simply Jesus on the cross. And we're called as believers to be imitators of Christ, take up our cross daily. And that's just a representation that every big play is not for me, but it's about glory above. And so that's why I do it, to make sure that I'm glorifying the person who's responsible for saving my life and the Lord of my life. So.
Okay, we only have a beautiful, it's incredible witness. In our final minutes, I've got to ask you, that I was in the Dome during that Steelers game. There was a fumble at the end, near the end of the game. This guy recovers it and shut the Steelers down. Then you all go to the championship. And there was that missed call that every member of the Houdat Nation is still, thank you, my people, we're all Houdat Nation today. The pain, and that was tough. That was a tough moment. The NFL, it seems, is not going to reform those misplays or allow any replays or reviews. Is that a mistake?
I think a lot goes into it. You always have to be able to see both sides of it, because, that was a very unfortunate play that happened to us, because we do feel like it changed the trajectory of it and a trajectory of what could have happened next. But you do have to realize that a lot of games will be affected by the rule change, which it could ultimately slow down the pace of the game.
I get it.
So you do have to understand that there are two perspectives. I think as far as what happened to us, it was a beautiful opportunity for us to take a negative situation and turn it into a positive. You look at Drew Brees' response to the entire city about, hey, we're not going to be bitter about this. We're not going to be resentful. We're going to actually turn this negative into a positive. We're going to use it as fuel and motivation to come back next year. And I think that's where we have to be as a society. It's a lot of bad things happening around us, but it's very easy to take a negative situation and turn it into a positive situation. Life is 10% what happened to you and 90% how you respond to it.
I agree. Drew Brees and this team, they have such grace, and I have to tell you, I always think, I think I should write a book about this. The country could learn so much about not only race relations, but what it means to be civil in society if you spent a week in New Orleans. Now, look, we have crime, we have our difficulties, but nowhere do you see a community, and I think it's partly because people, you had 9 separate races that came together, married, intermingled, shared recipes, our music. All of that is a bit of the gumbo that makes our city. When the Saints lost that championship game, the following, when they had the Super Bowl, they had a boycott in New Orleans. So people took to the streets, hundreds of thousands of people. The whole city was out in black and gold. They had spontaneous parades, cookouts, black, white, Hispanic, everybody coming together. It was such a beautiful moment. It was better than the Super Bowl. And that could only happen in New Orleans. I want you to tell people very quickly before we run out of time, tell me about your Devoted Dreamers Foundation that you founded and the MBA that you are pursuing now as an NFL player. Why did you make that decision to pursue your master's in business?
I think one of my mentors just talked about the degrees of separation and differentiation, and understanding that, we all can be on a level playing field, but if you just continue to climb up, you can differentiate yourself away from the people around you. And so that just was another reason and another goal to chase. As long as you live, I think you should never stop chasing goals, never stop chasing new dreams. And that's what, kind of leads into Devoted Dreamers foundation, which I have, and it's encouraging these kids who have these dreams that you can attain your dreams if you just believe and move towards them. And so what we have is a mentorship program. We have various programs throughout. We have a 7-week summer camp where we enhance kids spiritually, mentally, physically. We have gospel conferences where we take 250 kids in and just share the gospel with them and listen to worship music all day and try to teach them the gospel and give them an opportunity to come to Christ like I did. When I leave here, I'll be going back to my 7-on-7 travel elite team, where it's a mentorship program. We focus on academia. We focus on mentorship and dealing with peer pressure, drugs, alcohol, sex. And we also have a chaplain like I had come in and speak to them and share the gospel on top of playing football. And our main message to them are, you're not football players, you're influencers. Teaching them when they go in their classroom, they're an influencer. When they go to their friend's house and they go to parties, they're an influencer. So understanding that you can influence society in a positive way, you can influence society in a negative way, and taking that stigma of just being an athlete first and a person second away from.
What do you want? I love that. I love that you're giving back. That you're taking the time to give back. There are a lot of players who, there are a lot of players who do a lot of good like this. They have foundations. They reach out to the community. There are others who could care less. I love that you're the former. What do you want people here to take away from, before we leave, that from this criminal justice reform idea that you have and where you think the reform needs to take place? What do you want them to go back to their communities?
I would just say this: when it comes to people, when we remember people, we don't remember people for what they do. We remember people for what they did for us. And so when you measure somebody, to whom much is given, much is required. So what you have talent, you have treasure, you have resources, you have time. How you use those to help those around you is how people are going to remember you. And so as a nation, you have to think about nation in the same way. What makes our nation great really is the idea of what we do for everyone, not just what we do for ourselves. So as we become this great nation, or are this great nation, if we don't take all those resources to make sure it's extended to everybody, we're not being great. That's what makes us great as people. That's what makes us great as a nation.
You can find out more about Demario Davis's Devoted Dreamers Foundation at devoteddreamers.org. Go Saints. Who dat?